Hello everyone, welcome to Mr. Noctory. Today we won't tell you a story about war. We won't talk about emperors or dynasties. We won't learn about any lofty philosophy. We will talk about intimacy, set in the context of ancient sanitation and toilets, public society, individual and community. We will talk about poop, human poop, cow poop, the poop from the neighbor's baby who just cried and left something on your hand, and about how ancient people, from nobles to farmers, lived, loved and existed in the smell of their own. Before we start, if you really find this a cozy place to hide out late at night, please like and subscribe, but only if you really want to, no pressure. Like the rules in an old tavern, you only stay if you need a quiet spot. And you know what I like best? Reading the comments and seeing where you're from and what time it is now. Whether it's New York or Norway, 1 a.m. or 5 a.m. You're still here. And I see you. Now turn off the lights. Turn on a small fan if you have one. Not because it's hot, but for that gentle hum. You're living in ancient Rome. More specifically, you're trying to go to the toilet, and that, my friend, is no longer a private matter. You walk into the latrina, the largest public restroom in the city. No door, no walls, no dividers, no scented paper. Just long stone benches, holes carved right in the seat, lined up like park benches but with a much less romantic purpose. And the guy next to you is reciting poetry while straining. You notice a thin water channel beneath your feet running horizontally under all the seats. That's the waste drainage system. If you think that's smart, try imagining that stream carrying not just dirty water, but brown floaters bobbing like wartime stew. Beneath that water channel is a neatly laid out stone trench system. It runs with constant flowing water, usually sourced from nearby springs or reservoirs. But on dry days, you might face a backup situation, and you'll understand the feeling of looking down and seeing an emergency summit of civilization's leftovers. Royal latrines sometimes had marble floors, but they were still cold as icebergs. Public toilets, plain stone flooring, and your butt would be the one to judge the temperature without warning. That cold stone floor, especially in winter, turned every visit into a gamble. Sit too far, stomach cramps. Sit too long, numb butt. And when you stood up, you'd hear a crack, not from weapons, but from your hip joints protesting the living conditions. No flush, no toilet paper. Only a wooden stick with a rag wrapped around it, soaked in a dark, salty brine placed between the seats. One person used it, carefully set it back. The next person picked it up and continued the mission. That stick had a name, Spongia, a word that sounds kinda cute, until you realize it just went somewhere it shouldn't, and is now about to touch. You pick it up for the first time, hand shaking, eyes darting, face clenched like you're about to deliver a speech in ancient Greek. It's damp cold and suspiciously soft. You look at the salty water bucket it sits in between uses and wonder, did the last guy rinse properly? No one answers. Only a breeze blows across the stone seat, rippling the surface. You glance at the person beside you. They're stirring their stick like morning coffee. You swallow hard, grab the stick, and you know, you're about to do something every civilization has done. Touch history. Literally. In truth, the spongia wasn't exclusive to Rome. Ancient Greeks had similar versions, usually linen cloth, sometimes wax-coated for smoothness. The Egyptians, a bit more refined, used cattail plants or crumpled papyrus, softer but more tear-prone. Mesopotamians used their hands, then washed with ash. Less to worry about, but you'd have to trust the ash was cleaner than the hands. The one thing they all lacked: no perfumed rolls with sunflower prints. If you're already grossed out, remember, the ancients didn't think this way. They sat shoulder to shoulder chatting away. Some discussed politics, some confessed love, some gave birth, right in the middle of doing their business, in major latrines like those in Ostia or Pompeii. People even carved poems on the walls. Love poems, satire, or simply, Marcus was here and left something behind. Ancient graffiti, you know, sometimes carved just above the poop. Not just poems, Latrina was a hub of public culture. The walls were covered with graffiti, from love curses, crude anti-government rants, to instructions like, "If you're straining, don't shake your head." One inscription reads, "Julia, she did it on seat number 3. Another warns, "Whoever uses the spongia and doesn't rinse, may Goddess Cloacina curse them with diarrhea all winter." The Romans worshipped Cloacina, goddess of the sewers prayed to for smooth drainage. There was even a temple to her, near the market's main latrine. Funny, right? A civilization that built the grandest colosseums, but still believed in a goddess to unclog the pipes. Latrina taught you this. Dignity was a luxury. You had no private space. You had no tissues. You only had spongia and vague hope that salt water kills germs. Some wealthy people hired slaves to carry their personal spongia. Others brought lucky charms, afraid that when touching down, they'd be pulled by ghosts. There were rumors. People had died on the toilet, not from stomach pain, but from assassination, or a snake slithering up from below. And that's just the tip of the disaster iceberg called latrina. Sometimes public toilets became crime scenes, where a politician got stabbed from behind while concentrating. Some public bathhouses even collapsed due to too many people sitting at once. And during heavy rains, water systems overflowed. You didn't just deal with flooding. You dealt with flooding that had flavor. In Pompeii, they found a skeleton still sitting on a stone seat buried in volcanic ash, meaning the person didn't make it up in time. Died mid-relief. Not everyone is recorded in history, but some are remembered by fossilized butt prints. You sit there, hear the drip of water. A sharp, sour smell hits your nose, and from somewhere an old man says, "Caesar once sat right here, you know." You laugh, but it's a crooked laugh, because you know you're about to use that stick. Whether you're an emperor, a slave, or a philosopher, the ending is the same. Ancient public restrooms were just that. Public, truly public. No partitions, no deodorizer. Just people next to people at their most vulnerable moments. And no matter how hard you pretend it's normal, you'll remember that feeling, being seen and smelled at the same time. Because the ancient toilet wasn't just a place to go. It was a place people faced each other. No makeup, no social rank. Just breathing, straining and dripping water in silence. You step out of the latrina, butt-numb heart empty but head full of questions. Did someone else once sit here thinking about life like you? Could a great empire begin? from a place where everyone once sat down and left a piece of themselves behind. Maybe what kept Rome alive wasn't just laws or legions, but that they dared to sit next to one another at their most vulnerable and didn't hide. You don't realize how dirty you are until a Greek philosopher walks up to you, sniffs you and says, "Your scent is a blend of essence and decay," then invites you to bathe. Welcome to the ancient Greek bathhouse, where bathing isn't about cleanliness, but about becoming more virtuous. Sounds wrong? Yeah, but you'll understand. You walk into a dimly lit terracotta room, low ceiling, no windows, just a small slit where wind sneaks through. Cypress smoke rises from a corner, blending with the scent of sweat. Scraping sounds click and echo. Philosophy bounces off the walls. If filth cannot be seen by the eye, does it still exist? Then an old man scratches his armpit. Ancient Greeks didn't use soap. They used olive oil, that glossy liquid lightly fragrant but slippery like fried fish grease. You pour a little into your hand. It flows like the tears of a slave who just had their food rations cut. Then you start rubbing. Rub your whole body. Head, face, chest, armpits, groin. Not a single square centimeter spared. The Greeks believed olive oil purifies the soul because the soul lies beneath the epidermis. But before you're scraped, you must understand. In ancient Greece, body hair was a sign of barbarism. Not everyone accepts this right away. You might come from a culture where body hair is natural masculine protective against sunlight. But to the Greeks, especially wrestlers, philosophers, and Olympic athletes, the smoother, the closer to the ideal. They'll look at you, your stubbly mustache, hairy legs, and an untamed jungle down there, like you're from Thrace or worse, the East. Full body hair removal was a ritual. First the oil, then the razor. Each stroke declared, "I choose civilization. I reject instinct." A historian once wrote, "No man enters the bathhouse with chest hair intact unless he has surrendered to irrationality." And then, the part you're not ready for, bronze razor, not sharp like modern blades, but sharp enough to scrape away filth oil, and whatever pride remains, you hold it, gently pull from shoulder to belly. Feels like spreading butter on rough stone. Not smooth, not easy, but it's a ritual, a small myth in everyday life. After shaving clean, Greeks used a strigil, a curved metal blade like a coat hook, to scrape off the mixture of oil, sweat, dust, and dead skin. Strigil wasn't just a tool, it was a near-sacred personal item. Many etched their names on the handle as if to say, "This is my curved virtue." Some even gifted strigils as a gesture with deep implication. A fine, shiny strigil made from good bronze could earn more respect in the bathhouse than a philosophical argument. There's a tale of a young philosopher being beaten for mistakenly using someone else's strigil, not for property violation, but because it was bodily offense. In that naked world, one curved piece of metal was the line between you and chaos, feeling, kind of like scraping congealed fat from a beef noodle pot. Look at the strigil after a full scrape. You'll see greyish-brown gunk with a smell like cement mixed with cheese sealed in a shoebox for 3 days. But strangely, after it's all done, you do feel truly clean. Not just physically. It's a feeling. I have washed off mediocrity. I am the fragrant version of Socrates. Around you, white-haired men argue about politics. But don't think everyone came here for philosophy. A third of Athenian men bathed not to cleanse, but for hot gossip, who just fought with their wife, who's dating a tragic actress, who's accused of corruption but still uses premium oil. The bathhouse was Greece's social media, where you posted via body scent, commented with sly remarks, and liked with a glance. A politician lost votes for farting in the bathhouse just as his rival's wife walked in. In a corner, someone secretly etched into the brick wall, Nicias has a mole on his left butt cheek. Truth or not, the whole city whispered about it for a week. A bodybuilder oils his chest, admiring himself in a bronze mirror. A young slave bends down, wiping spilled oil, listening to a lecture on ontological existence. Everyone is naked, and no one finds it strange. Because in a Greek bathhouse, nudity is the default. Covering up is suspicious. The more natural you are, the more people trust. You're genuine. Greek philosophy was like that. Born in the bathhouse, not the classroom. There's a rumor that Plato conceived his theory of forms while shaving his back. And you, fresh from the Roman latrina, slowly begin to understand, maybe, to understand the world, you must first clean yourself. Olive oil flows on your skin like sunlight rolling down white marble statues. Strigil scrapes off the rough exterior, and the razor, like a reminder, beauty always comes with a hint of pain. You leave the bathhouse. The oil still lingers faintly, but your mind feels as if Socrates just lectured you for 3 hours, and you think if the world needs fewer wars, perhaps it should all begin with a silent oil scrape. Before sitting down, you might have to do something strange. Check if the sponge stick is clean, and who used it before. Yes, allow me to introduce the tessorium, a wooden stick with a sponge attached, dipped in vinegar or salt water to wipe. After use, it's placed back where it was, for the next person, to reuse. In some latrina, dozens of tessoria were hung along the wall, like you've entered a beauty store, but everything is communal. One historical question remains unanswered. Who was the last person to use it each day? And did they sleep well at night? You sit down. The stone seat is freezing. No lid, no partition. Just a long trench, straight as a blade, running through the public room. You've just settled in when a hiss echoes from somewhere below. Not water, not a fart, but the sound of life. Welcome to the latrina, the communal toilet of ancient Rome, where secrets, sighs, and even political plots were flushed down with the water. And sometimes, not just water flows, but also snakes. Section 1. The setting. Naked, public, and full of crime potential. On the walls were carvings, not for decoration, but to categorize content. There were zones for confessions, cursing, and philosophical advice on clean living. In fact, some latrina became underground social boards, where the heartbroken vented, the cheated accused, and reviews of brothel services were scratched in charcoal or sharp nails. Flavia, gentle but charges extra. Marcus, owes me 2 denarii. Watch out for the goat-bearded guy. A kind of Roman Twitter, no login needed, just hold your breath long enough to read. You thought you'd find peace while doing your business. Wrong. Even in the latrina, social class lingered, like undissolved excrement. At the trench's head, where herb scents filled the air, better wipes were provided, and oil lamps flickered, was the zone for nobles, priests, and the wealthy. In the middle sat the commoners, merchants, craftsmen, retired soldiers. At the end, welcome slaves, prostitutes, and all who couldn't afford the right to shit in peace. Some places even had latrina guards, who used long sticks to nudge those who sat too long, or nodded off mid-defecation. And you thought only theatres checked tickets. Latrina had no stalls. People sat so close their elbows could brush someone's butt while turning to greet them. You poop, while across from you, a senator discusses legislation. The person on your left just ate something with beans. The one on your right is reciting a love poem. You're in the middle. You try not to breathe through your nose. On the walls were carvings, again, not for decoration, but to categorize content. But you won't focus long, because the water flowing beneath those stone seats, where you cannot see, is home to rats, worms, snakes, and other toothy things. Section 2. Snakes, the uninvited guests. There's a wall painting in Ostia, Rome's major port, showing a man leaping off a stone seat, below him a snake with its mouth open. The painting isn't signed, but archaeologists call it Rome and the almost lost butt. At Pompeii, they even found a tiny skeleton, suspected to be a water snake, dried up inside a latrina drain. The question, it slithered up, but couldn't get back down. Snakes weren't just stories. They appeared in many medical texts from Galen's time, where doctors advised, anyone visiting the latrina in summer, bring a torch, or pray to Mercury to ward off misfortune. And as a cruel joke, some places dropped clay snake figurines into the latrina to scare others for fun. Plenty of old writings say, Romans would rather suffer constipation than be bitten on the butt. Snakes climbing up latrine drains was real, especially in summer, when sewer heat drove animals to seek cooler spots. And since latrina were connected, many small or water snakes could crawl up with the flow. There was even a legal case in Roman history. An equestrian gentleman was bitten by a snake while composing poetry. He sued the latrina owner for unsafe design, demanding compensation, a jug of fine amphora wine. After that, many places kept torches burning near latrina to repel animals, or used incense mixed with powdered human ash, believed to ward off spirits. Section 3. Latrina. A fine place to get assassinated. You ask, who'd kill someone in a toilet? Romans answered, because that's where people are vulnerable, naked, and unarmed. Records mention Emperor Elagabalus always carried a small knife into the latrina, not to fight, but to inspect the drain hole before sitting. Many politicians, slaves, and merchants were strangled, stabbed from behind, or accidentally pushed into the waste system. And strangely, their bodies were often never found. The latrina, with flowing water and strong odours, was the perfect place for a scream to be swallowed whole. Section 4. A little lesson in caution before sitting down. So next time you sit on what looks like a harmless stone seat, remember, there might be eyes watching from below. Someone could be sharpening a blade right behind you. You might become the next subject of wall graffiti. And as the Romans used to say, anyone who poops without caution deserves to be bitten. If you ever thought ancient Romans were only good at building bridges and erecting statues, then you should know one more thing. They brushed their teeth with urine. Not a joke, not a theory, but a widely recognized dental hygiene formula for centuries. And not just human urine. The most preferred type was horse urine. Section 1. Urina, the whitening miracle of the ancient world. Romans believed that urine, thanks to its ammonia, could clean stains, bleach enamel, and kill bacteria. At major markets like those in Pompeii, people placed wooden barrels to collect urine from the streets. Some even hung signs, "Pee here for a brighter Rome." The urine was then distilled or fermented, then distributed to handmade toothpaste producers. Imagine a Roman walking into a banquet with dazzling white teeth and a mouth that smells like ammonia. Section 2. Ancient recipe. Urine plus. Bone ash plus. Crushed seashells. Pliny the Elder, the ancient encyclopedist, listed a common toothpaste formula. 1 part urine, preferably from a white horse. 1 part bone ash or animal ash. Finely crushed seashells. A bit of resin or fragrance, if you're a noble. All mixed into a powder, dipped with linen cloth, and scrubbed onto the teeth. The result? White, but bitter, and unforgettable. Section 3. The urine collecting profession, and the urine tax. Before dawn, while Rome still lay in mist, you might hear the sound of jars knocking outside the street. That's not the bread seller. It's the fullones, professional urine collectors, armed with wooden buckets, linen cloths, and incredibly tolerant noses. They roamed every corner, stopped by taverns, brothels, public baths, the richest sources of liquid gold. Some places even posted signs. Horse urine cost double. Best used within 3 days. Fullones sometimes fought for collecting rights in upper-class neighborhoods. A famous brawl in Trastevere nearly spilled 3 jars of noble pee and cost a gentleman his wedding night teeth whitening contract. No one laughed at that. Because in this business, the stronger the smell, the stronger the profit. Section 4. Royal urine scandal. In the year 67, in Pompeii, a jar of royal white horse urine, meant for making toothpaste for imperial concubines, was stolen. The high class was shaken. Graffiti on bathhouse walls read, "Who holds the princess's smile? Return the urine to the people." The suspect was a jeweler known for selling rose-scented mouthwash. No one was convicted, but from then on, royal urine was kept in silver jars and guarded by 2 soldiers. Rome never joked about white teeth. Section 5. The breath of Jupiter, when urine became divine. In Roman superstition, urine didn't just clean, it connected to the gods. People believed white horse urine collected on Thursday, Jupiter's day, would give you teeth bright as the morning star. Some Stoic philosophers strongly opposed, but toothpaste merchants made the most of it. They labelled breath of Jupiter, divinely clean, heavenly bright. Of course, the price was divine too. A small jar could buy a silver necklace, or a night at a luxury bathhouse. In the year 67, in Pompeii, a jar of royal white horse urine, meant for making toothpaste for imperial concubines, was stolen. The high class was shaken. Graffiti on bathhouse walls read, "Who holds the princess's smile? Return the urine to the people." The suspect, a jeweler known for selling rose-scented mouthwash. No one was convicted, but from that moment on, royal urine was kept in silver jars, guarded by 2 soldiers. Rome never joked about white teeth. Before dawn, while the city still lay in mist, You might hear the sound of jars knocking down the alley. That's not the bread seller. It's the Foulones, professional urine collectors, armed with wooden buckets, linen cloths, and incredibly tolerant noses. They roamed every corner, stopped by taverns, brothels, public baths, the richest sources of liquid gold. Some places even posted signs. Horse urine cost double, best used within 3 days. Foulones sometimes fought over collection rights in noble districts. One famous brawl in Trastevere nearly spilled 3 jars of noble pee and cost a gentleman his wedding night teeth whitening appointment. No one laughed, because in this business, the stronger the smell, the stronger the profit. Section 6. White teeth, dark life, consequences and prestigious odour. Emperor Vespasian, famously frugal, imposed a tax on urine. And from that, the immortal phrase was born, pecunia non olet. Money doesn't stink. Urine collectors wandered the city with buckets, knocking on every public toilet. Some even used urine to wash clothes. Yes, wash. Because ammonia also cleaned linen very well. At noble banquets, there was sometimes a fun little game, comparing smiles. The winner wasn't the one with sweet breath, but the one whose teeth made others squint from brightness. White as a Venus statue, that was the standard. And urine was the only way to get there without silver dental plating. Some families even hired servants to brush their children's teeth every morning with freshly collected horse urine. And if the child cried, they whispered, "Don't cry. One day your smile will light up the forum." Records note some nobles suffered severe tooth decay from scrubbing too hard. Those with gum infections drank salted wine to ease the pain. Yet, bad breath was seen as proof of diligent brushing, like a kind of natural perfume. If today you see someone flashing dazzling teeth in a historical movie, remember, they might be holding a bit of pungent truth from the past. From urine, we forged a smile. A Roman toothbrusher probably. Before detox clay spa treatments cost $300 per hour, the ancient Egyptians practiced it for free in the desert, with hot sand, sweat, and unwillingness seeping through every pore. Not everyone had clean water to bathe, especially if you weren't a noble, and especially more if you lived farther than a stone's throw from the Nile River. So how did they stay clean? The answer: dry baths with hot sand. No showers, no soap, just human skin, sunshine, and dust. Nile River mud face masks, a privilege for worshipped skin. Not just sand, ancient Egyptians also used Nile River mud for face masks, one of the earliest recorded facial masks in history. The mud was mixed with resin, lotus oil, or beeswax, then applied to the face and left to dry naturally under the sun, a treatment that was beautifying and cracked the skin like warehouse walls. Noble women often flaunted lotus-shaped cracks on their faces, seen as a sensual pattern. It was believed if the dried mud cracked into a crescent shape, it meant a week of good luck. If it cracked across the nose, it was time to pray to Isis immediately. Egyptians rolled themselves in hot sand like roasted chicken, letting sweat soak into the earth, dirt cling to skin, then scrubbed it off with smooth stones or linen fibers. Sand helped absorb excess oil and sweat, exfoliate dead skin, massage rarely cared for spots, the feeling burning, arm hair losing, and like being a half-cooked kebab. Section 2. Noble sand versus commoner sand. Sand near the river was preferred smoother, less gravel, and infused with Ra's divine energy, according to one priest's marketing slogan. Meanwhile, commoners had to use coarse dry sand often with tiny rocks, insect bones, and a faint smell of camel. Some records show nobles imported sand from the south sifted through silk and mixed with scented resin or lotus. After bathing, you might not smell nice, but you'd feel like someone else entirely. Section 3. When dead skin was part of ritual and scratching was a religious privilege. Cat-shaped back scrubbers. When Bastet guards every dead skin cell. Egyptians didn't just scrub with hands. Some nobles used bronze tools carved with cat heads called Bastet's claw, named after the cat goddess. This tool was for back scratching and for display. Some were inlaid with gems reserved for ritual baths during full moons. Servants had to learn to scratch without breaking skin, and only after praying to a cat statue. After bathing, the claw was stored in a box sprinkled with gold powder, as a way to thank Bastet for giving me a clean, flake-free back. Some body cleaning rituals before mummification also used fine sand mixed with natron to remove old skin. Living people didn't need natron. They just needed dry sand and a good friend, willing to scrub their back. At Karnak temple, scenes of priests scratching each other's backs with whetstones were recorded seen as acts of spiritual purification. Bathing wasn't just physical, it meant spiritually shedding the dust of the day before. Section 4. Menstruation in the ancient world. Before there were sterilized tampons or silicone menstrual cups, ancient people faced menstruation like battling a midnight storm with no umbrella, no raincoat, and no one teaching you to pack dry clothes. No supermarkets, no brands, no instructions for use, only survival instinct, and the softest things in the house, scrap cloth, forest, moss, sheep wool, and sometimes torn papyrus. Section 5. Egypt, rolled wool and goddess Isis. In ancient Egypt, wealthy women used rolled wool pads, an early form of tampon soaked in perfume oil or honey for antibacterial purposes, and to mask odor. Lower class women, stuffed, reused cloth washed again and again, sometimes dried on rooftops under the sun for sterilization and occasional bird pecks. They believed goddess Isis. The mother deity taught women how to protect their bodies, and that throwing away used pads carelessly could lead to infertility. Old papyrus scraps once used for contracts, spells, or neighbor complaints were sometimes torn into emergency liners. And then came the rumor. If you accidentally used papyrus with Seth's name on it, your period would last twice as long and bring snake dreams for 3 nights. No one knew for sure, but many women burned papyrus before use, a ritual to ward off evil. After bathing, they prayed to Isis, may my blood flow like the Nile, gently and on time. Every drop of blood is a reminder that your body carries a part of the Nile and resilience. An ancient Egyptian midwife probably, forbidden in temples when period blood meant impurity. Greek women on their periods were seen as temporarily impure, forbidden from touching sacred statues, picking grapes in holy vineyards, and especially from entering Athena's temple on unlucky days. An inscription in Eleusis warned she who carries her own blood must not stain the divine stones. Some places even had a soft quarantine where menstruating women could rest, weave, or silently admire the god statue from afar like a temporary spiritual retreat. The Greeks believed gods were easily angered by blood, even natural blood. So if anyone entered a temple during her period, She had to bathe in seawater mixed with salt and goat's milk to purify, then offer 3 bundles of dill and 1 white dove. Ancient Greek women didn't have many options. They used dry moss, absorbent, forest found, but needed to be beaten for bugs. Old rags, reusable, but had to be washed in salt water or diluted wine. Girls were often scolded for ruining precious fabrics. For woman business, embroidered linen used wrongly could get you shaved bald in front of Hera's altar. In Rome, women often used layered cloth pieces tucked under chiton dresses. No proper underwear meant every step was a calculated journey. Some stone carvings show women hanging pads by the window after washing a declaration, "I still have my cycle," and fertility a Roman version of self-care. In public baths, menstruation was unwelcome. Women were banned from bathing during their period, accused of defiling the sacred waters. Some were even kicked out for being suspected of being on their period. Some Greek records show some days women did nothing. They sat in rooms, burned incense and wrote on wax tablets things like, "If Apollo is male, how would he understand cramps?" And so, among rags, wool, forest moss and peppermint oil, they learned to befriend what the world called taboo, but they called it my body. You think the itching from bug bites is just a summer camp thing. Think again. To the ancients, itching was an inseparable part of life, like taxes, or roosters crowing at 4 in the morning. Regardless of class, nationality or faith, lice, scabies, fungus and fleas lived like official residents on human skin. And often, quite often, they were even given affectionate nicknames. In ancient Egypt, shaving one's head wasn't just a fashion statement, it was a full-on lice control strategy. Well-off families shaved their heads once a week, applied scented oils to repel bugs, and wore wigs made from sheep's wool or flax, items washed separately, salted, and dried on the roof. Poorer folks used stone combs or fingernails. It wasn't uncommon to see someone in the market scratching their head with the intensity of someone playing the harp. In Greece, lice were considered a philosophical misfortune. Diogenes, the ascetic philosopher, was once caught picking lice off his cloak in the middle of the Athenian square. When accused of being filthy, he replied, "The head may think, but the nape itches better to live honest than falsely fragrant." But not everyone was as boldly philosophical as Diogenes. In some aristocratic families, especially those with daughters of marrying age, lice combs were heirlooms. There were olive wood combs carved with finesse, both for delousing and for proudly sitting atop dressing tables as a sign of maturity of the scalp. Some texts even mention a small ritual in which a mother would delouse her daughter for the first time, saying, "From today on, you are no longer a child. You are a woman capable of facing the life beneath the hair. Scabies is the guest you never invite, but it still shows up, settles in, and throws a party." In Rome, those with scabies were distinguished by the herbal vinegar they applied every morning, a mix of grape vinegar, wormwood root, and sheep fat. The smell was sour, sweet, and pungent enough to clear a bench for personal space. Noble families might apply mint leaves or sunbathe at noon to kill bacteria, while slaves were tasked with scraping dead skin using dull copper knives. When scabies spread to the face, the afflicted had to wear a wooden mask, dubbed the Apollo block, because no one dared look at a scab-ridden face without invoking mythic bad luck. In ancient China, soldiers who marched through swamps often developed military foot fungus blisters peeling skin and itching like ants crawling beneath your bones. Civilians treated it by soaking feet in strong tea rice water or buffalo urine. Some villages even whispered that children's urine was a sacred remedy since they had never sinned against the earth god. Meanwhile, in Rome, genital fungus was softly nicknamed Venus's red blossom. Those infected were required to abstain from sex fast and wear a wool hat as both a physical and spiritual form of repentance. No ointments, no clinics, no Google to search blister spreading fast. What do? What did the ancients have? A pile of warm ash, fresh shiso leaves, and the hope that the gods weren't too busy to help them scratch. And even when the itching arrived mid-feast or mid-sacrifice, the ancients still found a way to scratch at the right time, in the right place, and in the right style. Because in a world full of dust, smoke, fire, and temples, the one who itched and didn't scratch was the loser of the age. Before there were sterilized bottles and 5-layer protective diapers, ancient children lived and peed like little gods who cared nothing about consequences. In Egypt, newborns were wrapped in reusable linen cloth called Hathor diapers, not because it was sacred, but because everyone prayed that Goddess Hathor would cover the smell. These cloth pieces were lightly washed in river water dried on hot stones, then sprinkled with fragrant oil from myrrh resin. When peeing babies often lay on sun-warmed tiles or scattered sand, no one scolded because simply it was the river god's business. Many households even believed that babies who peed a lot were blessed by Sobek the crocodile god, meaning long life ahead. In Rome, diapers didn't exist. Instead, there was the fascial long fabric bands wrapped from chest to ankle, making the baby look like a wool sausage roll. When wet, the fascial was dried immediately at the window. And you guessed it, the street smelled gloriously like midday pee. Whenever it was time for a diaper change, Roman nannies didn't need clocks, only their noses. As soon as someone frowned while passing by, the babies were flipped and checked. In Greece, children were potty trained with precision from a very young age. Boys were trained to pee into clay pots called practice amphorae. If they hit the target, the whole house would cheer. Little Apollo can aim now. If they missed, no big deal, since the courtyard was paved with porous tiles. Water would seep down just like grandma's patience. In fact, infant urine was considered sacred. Some families kept a small ceramic bowl of baby pee on the doorstep, believing that evil spirits would slip and fall if they dared approach. From Athens to Thebes, from farmers to royals, there was one truth that spared no one. We've all peed on the tiles. And antiquity, though full of rituals, gods and chariots, could never escape the scent of the very first steps in life. If you ever thought antiquity smelled like lavender in a spa, take a deep breath, because we're about to enter the world of fermented herbs, divine sweat, and aristocratic armpits. In Rome, deodorizing wasn't just about hygiene, it was an art. But instead of aluminum roll-ons or golden spray bottles, they used fermented blends of herbs and sour grape vinegar. People would soak sage leaves, lavender cumin seeds, and orange peels in old wine, leaving it for weeks under the Mediterranean sun until the scent was strong enough to overpower post-wrestling armpits. This was called vineroma, a kind of folk perfume favoured by wrestlers and public bathhouses. There was even advice at the time that said a man who bathes in vinaroma doesn't need to shout to be noticed. In Egypt, they use fragrant resin from myrrh trees and crocodile fat, applying it to sensitive areas like the wrists, nape-navel, and lower back. Nobles would add drops of blue lotus oil believed to make you irresistible to goddess Hathor, or at least to whoever lived downwind. Egyptian women had a fun trick hiding a scented pellet inside their wig. When the weather got hot, it would melt slowly down the neck, creating a fragrant, soft and shiny effect. In Greece, Socrates was once criticized for not smelling good, not because he didn't bathe, but because he refused to use scented water. For Greek philosophers, smelling good was a lie. True attraction had to come from sharp reasoning. However, those who weren't that into philosophy chased after sweat that smelled like life. Athletes would bathe in a mix of white wine and goat urine, then rub on olive oil mixed with chamomile flowers, producing a unique scent known as the smell of victory and endurance. Some people wore garlic or dried onion necklaces, not to neutralize odor, but to keep others too far away to smell them in the first place. In a world without bacteria, as a concept, deodorizing was both a spiritual and tactical battle. You couldn't stop your body from sweating, but you could choose to sweat like someone worth remembering. And that's how the ancients chose their scent, not to hide but to declare, "I'm here, I smell, and I am ancient." Bathing in the modern imagination is the smooth image of warm water soap bubbles and a soothing lullaby echoing in the bathroom. But in ancient times, bathing was a rare event, almost sacred, and absolutely never daily. The ancient Egyptians living under scorching sun and desert winds didn't bathe daily, as you might think. They washed their faces each morning with lotus water, wiped their bodies with damp linen cloth, and only bathed fully when there was a special occasion. Weddings, funerals, or preparing for a ritual offering. In fact, Egyptian priests were the ones who bathed the most, because they were required to be clean in the eyes of the gods. They bathed 4 times a day, not for hygiene but for ritual. Ironically, common folk were not advised to do the same, since overbathing was thought to weaken one's life force. In Rome, people flocked to the Thermae public bathhouses, but not necessarily to get clean. They came to talk politics, shave, snack, sit in steam rooms, and sweat as much as possible. The actual rinsing often came last or never at all if they were too tired. And even more fascinating, not all sweat was the same. The sweat of gladiators, victorious warriors, or famous athletes was believed to contain life energy. Some Romans even collected their sweat with sponges, squeezed it into ceramic jars, and sold it as a kind of aphrodisiac backache remedy or vitality booster. It sounds insane, and smells like it too. Think niche perfumes are the peak of luxury. Try paying to sniff General Decimus's sweat after 3 days of combat drills. That's faith, and sometimes a business strategy. The Romans believed sweat released your troubles. So instead of washing their hair every day, they wore wigs. Instead of scrubbing until skin peeled, they scraped with a strigil and applied olive oil. Done. In Greece, philosophers and athletes argued about bathing even more than they argued about knowledge. Some claimed that frequent baths weakened the bones. Others said only those with nothing to think about needed to bathe every day. A few notorious philosophers even lived by the principle of water resistance. No contact with water unless it rained. And if it rained, they turned their backs so it wouldn't wash away. Their aura. Bathing less in ancient culture meant self-mastery. You feared no smell, no dust, no judgmental glances. Only the loss of spirit from soaking too long. And so while the modern world demands 2 baths a day, natural soap, hydrating gel, and sunscreen, the ancients needed only 1 moonlit bath per month to feel truly clean. Fragrance doesn't beat awareness. Dryness doesn't beat wisdom. Before electric toothbrushes and minty toothpaste, the ancients had to get creative to keep their mouths from becoming biohazards. And what they came up with was ash. Kitchen ash ground, pumice sea salt, even fermented urine left out to mature all were once used to clean teeth. Nothing was too nasty if it meant a bright smile, even if your teeth were chipped in a few places. In Egypt, oral cleaning recipes were recorded on papyrus over 5,000 years ago. They mixed natron, salt, mint flowers, and crushed stone into a chewable paste spicy enough to knock you sideways, but supposedly lessened the stink of your mouth. The Romans liked urine. They used fermented Spanish urine called urina to rinse their mouths in the morning. Why? Because it contained ammonia, a natural whitener. A Roman noble's good morning could very well mean, have you scrubbed your teeth? But what they really meant was done chewing the pea jar yet. In Greece, people wrapped linen around their fingers, dipped it in dill ash, and scrubbed their teeth clockwise. If you asked why clockwise, they'd tell you that's the direction Apollo turns the sun. Ancient Greek poetry once said teeth white as moonlight, but breath like the bottom of a fish jar. Because brushing was one thing, keeping your mouth fragrant was a whole other ordeal. Egyptian medical texts like the Ebers, papyrus, even noted specific formulas. Take 1 part natron, 2 parts crushed seashells mixed with resin and mint flowers, rub on teeth each morning. Sounds like a cookie recipe, but instead of tasting nice, it just helped prevent mold on your tongue. Some Egyptian nobles even hired slaves to grind pearl shells and burn thyme roots just to make gum whitening paste for their sarcophagus. Because to them, even in death, you needed white teeth to smile properly at your funeral. And if you think brushing with charcoal is a modern trend, you're just repeating a very ancient mistake. But at least back then, no one interrupted your brushing with ads. To the ancients, bathing wasn't just about being clean. It was about purifying the soul. In Egypt, priests weren't allowed to enter temples without bathing at least twice a day, in cold water in the desert, and often completely shaving off all body hair. Why? Because hair was thought to be the hideout of evil spirits. Only when the body had nothing unclean left could it be considered worthy of speaking to the gods. The Romans had public baths, but before major rituals, they retreated to hot springs. They offered perfumed water to the gods and scrubbed themselves until they bled away to wash away sins before meeting Jupiter. In Greece, the Plintria festival dedicated to the goddess Athena was when the whole city stopped working to wash the statue of the goddess. People soaked in salt water washed their faces with ash and burned herbs in their homes. That scent, a mix of scorched thyme and rotting bay leaves, was believed to repel demons. The ancient Hittites performed ritual baths using goat's milk and animal blood to cleanse warriors after battle. At Roman temples before special ceremonies like Saturnalia, communal bathing rituals were held. Dozens soaked in perfume pools with lavender and incense ash, scrubbing their skin while whispering prayers and gossiping about their neighbors. Some stone tablets even recorded priestly advice. Clean the body first, clean the mouth next, but to clean the soul, you'll need silence. Sadly, in a public bath, silence was the one thing no one ever found. In Sumer, they used rainwater stored in stone jars, believing it to be drops from the heart of the god Enki, each one carrying divine forgiveness. To the ancients, bathing wasn't just pouring water. It was stepping into a sacred state, shedding your old self. It was where you washed off dirt, sweat, and sometimes the fear of being ignored by the gods. Because if you think being clean is enough, you've never lived in a world where dirt meant sin. You've bathed to relax. The ancients, they bathed to survive the wrath of the gods. Don't think water was just to rinse off dust. Ancient water was to erase sins. Each drop that fell was a chance to begin again, or at least to look like you tried. In ancient Judaism, the mikveh ritual wasn't just soaking. It was a journey from unclean to pure by shivering in a cold basin, praying, and absolutely not looking at the person next to you who was doing the exact same thing, just with slightly less regret in their eyes. The Romans believed in lustratio, parading livestock around the city, sprinkling salt, burning incense and bathing the cow. Not to clean it, but so the whole city could be ritually purified through its back. Poor thing, a sacrificial bar of soap for the masses. In Egypt, bathing the dead was a ritual of sin washing. Corpses were rinsed with palm wine wrapped in oils and splashed with something called artificial tears, meant to symbolize the assumed emotions of the living. Because let's face it, the real relatives might have been busy dividing the inheritance. Sparta, oh, completely different. Bathe with sheep blood mixed with cold water, shave your head and wash your feet. All before battle as a reminder, if you die today, at least die with clean feet. Because nothing's more disgraceful than falling in battle with stinky toes. In Greece, the Plinteria ritual made statue washing a national event. While Athena's statue got bathed in salt water, citizens washed their faces with ash-burned herbs in their homes and hoped theirs would be the last house visited by demons. The Hittites took it further. They bathed in goat milk mixed with animal blood. Not due to a soap shortage, but because they believed the liquid held the spirit of the creature strong enough to wash away post-war sins. In Egypt, priests weren't allowed in temples unless they bathed twice a day in cold desert water, and sometimes shaved completely bald, because hair was seen as the devil's Airbnb. At Roman temples before events like Saturnalia, large communal baths were held. Dozens soaked in fragrant pools with lavender and incense ash, scrubbing themselves while whispering confessions, and yes, whispering about their neighbors too. Some stone plaques preserved priestly sayings. Clean the body first, the mouth next, but to cleanse the heart, you'll need silence. Sadly, in public baths, silence was never part of the package. In Sumer, they used rainwater kept in stone jars, believing it was fallen from the heart of god Enki, each drop carrying forgiveness. To the ancients, bathing wasn't simply dousing yourself. It was entering a sacred space, shedding the old you. That's where you drop dirt, sweat, and sometimes the fear of being unseen by the divine. Because if you think being clean is enough, then you've never lived in a world where filth equaled guilt. You think now that we have deodorant, perfume, underarm roll-ons and scented toilet bombs, history must have smelled good too. Wrong. History never smelled good. And truth is human scent used to be a social identity, almost like a fingerprint for each civilization. In ancient Rome, public toilets had no doors. The stench rising from communal pits wasn't shameful. Quite the opposite. It was the scent of an empire in motion, stinky but mighty. Merchants could tell neighborhoods apart by the distinct smell near the drain. The Egyptians were slightly more elegant. They mixed resin, herbs and animal fat into a slow-release scent blob on their hair. When the heat melted the fat, the smell would spread, and that's how nobles stayed fragrant during a sweaty mummy party. The Greeks used olive oil for everything, rubbing skin, washing hair, even deodorizing private parts. Philosophy teachers wore wool robes, went shirtless, sat in stone lecture halls, and still managed 4-hour sessions without anyone fleeing. Not because they were clean, but because everyone smelled equally awful. In ancient China, perfumes were hidden in sleeves. A noblewoman would raise her hand, and a gentle fragrance would drift out. Commoners, they washed with charcoal, rice wine, and soybean water. Best strategy was not standing too close. In India, washing with water was sacred, but water didn't deodorize, so they burned incense, sprinkled lotus petals, and rubbed amber musk onto dusty robes. The Middle East took it further. They invented scented soap from ash and goat fat. Problem: only the rich had soap. The poor, scrubbed with pumice, then sun-dried. If you survived the scrub, you were clean. If not, no one dared come close. Even in the Middle Ages, when perfume was luxury, people just accepted human smell. In 14th century Europe, one researcher wrote, "The streets of Paris smell like a pot of rotting stew." And funny thing is, people still wrote poetry, fell in love, and survived amid all that funk. The end of human smell didn't come because we found a cure. It came because we stopped treating it as something that must be hidden at all costs. Because you can spray all the perfume you want, but if your soul is musty, history will remind you, not all who smell good are clean. Not all who stink deserve to be forgotten. Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine. Hippocrates is considered the father of medicine and the greatest physician in the history of ancient Greece. He was Greek. He was born in the year 460 on the island of Kos and died around the year 380 in the city of Larissa in the Thessaly region. For over 2,000 years, people have remembered him, not only because he was the founder of medicine with great treatment skills and strong professional ethics, but also because he is considered the author of the famous Hippocratic Oath, which every doctor must swear to follow. In addition, he and his disciples left behind many medical works forming the theories known as Hippocratic theory. In this view, medical practice must be based on observation and the study of the human body, and on the belief that disease comes from understandable causes, not from supernatural forces, or because the patient had sinful thoughts or blasphemed the gods of the time. He was also the founder of the Hippocratic School of Medicine. Section 2. Childhood. Imagine You're a little boy born on an island called Kos, where the sea is blue, the sun is fierce, and the scent of hundreds of medicinal herbs sneaks into every corner of your home. You have no iPad, no pediatrician, but you have your father, a traditional healer, and your mother, who can cook porridge with tree bark. And that's the first world Hippocrates knew. He was born into a family where healing was in the blood, not the blood of superstition, but the blood of those who believed the body could be listened to like an ancient language. His father, Heraclides, was a physician from the lineage of Asclepiades, said to be descendants of the god Asclepius. But instead of teaching his son to burn incense at temples, he taught Hippocrates to listen to coughs at night and the strange scent of sweat. To heal someone doesn't need God's just the right questions, he once said. There was no clinic, just patience, and a lot of time to listen to them breathe. Earlier, the boy had been taken to the Asclepion, a famous healing center on the island of Kos, where people believed the god Asclepius would appear in dreams to show the cure. Patients slept on stone floors, fasted to purify, waiting for a miracle in sleep. But Hippocrates didn't dream. He quietly observed and realized it was the sleep, the diet, and the stillness that helped patients recover. No divine miracles, just rest and understanding the body. Hippocrates' father didn't believe in demons. He believed in pulses, skin color, cough sounds, and patience. So instead of teaching his son how to pray to Apollo, he taught Hippocrates how to look into the eyes of a feverish person without panicking, how to place a hand on the forehead and guess if that person needed rest, or a cup of tea with honey and dill. The island of Kos wasn't just sun and waves. It was a treasure trove of natural medicine, from mint growing by the streams to dill and rosemary overflowing in the kitchen. People here didn't need medicine from Athens. They had leaves, roots, and knowledge passed down from grandmothers. Hippocrates grew up amid the smell of roasted ginger, the sound of mortar and pestle crushing herbs in clay jars filled with bark-brewed water. He learned that every change in climate, like a shift in sea breeze, could affect illness. Even mist could warn of a coming fever. That boy grew up to the sound of soft moans, the smell of boiled herbs, and the waves crashing against rocks every night. And somehow, instead of fear, he found it normal, even peaceful. While other kids played rock throwing or leapt over sandbanks, Hippocrates sat outside the house, not just watching but recording. From a young age, he was already familiar with wax tablets, reed pens, and repetitive questions like, how many heartbeats? What color is the urine? Did the patient eat fish yesterday? Thanks to this habit, Hippocrates later created detailed documentation, which modern medicine now calls clinical charts. He wrote down how his uncle observed ulcers, how he talked to fishermen returning from sea, men with salt-cracked hands, and coughs from cold winds. He asked them what they ate where they slept, if they ever shivered at night. From those conversations, Hippocrates didn't just learn about illness. He learned about people, about how they suffered but still smiled, about how an old lady said, "I'm just a little tired," while burning with 104-degree fever, about how his mother used mint leaves to soothe a cough, and how his father sat for hours listening to the elderly talk about pains no one else believed. By age 10, Hippocrates already knew a person may not die from illness, but could lose all hope if no one listens. He didn't know about titles, didn't think of glory. He only knew there's something in the human body, so fragile, but if you look closely, listen long enough, it might be saved. And that was the beginning, not with a staff or a white robe, but with a small wax tablet, a few shaky notes, and a quiet belief. Disease isn't a dark miracle. It's a small map leading to something that must be understood. In the warm breeze of that night, a little boy didn't dream of being a hero. He just dreamed that if someone fell ill, there would be someone like him who stayed and never walked away. Section 3. Adulthood. You are 17 years old, and the world beyond the island of Kos begins to call your name. Not with formal invitations, but with the coughs of strangers, with strange swellings on the skin of a child no one could cure, and with the question echoing in your head, if Father isn't here, then who will listen to them? So Hippocrates left home, not just out of thirst for knowledge, but because strange fevers were spreading through the fishing village. A child convulsed after 3 days of dry coughing. An old man delirious from thirst in the middle of winter. His father, the man who was always silent but never abandoned anyone, was gone too. And to Hippocrates, staying meant stepping into the shadow of the man who had passed. So he left carrying both the emptiness and an unspoken vow. He didn't take much, just a few rolls of cloth, some pieces of dried herbs, a bronze scalpel, and a faded wooden notebook with childhood notes. His first destination, Thessaly, a land larger with more wine and more prejudice. People there still believed illness came from angering the goddess Hera. A healer once smeared tree sap on the forehead of a feverish child, then screamed that the fever came from the soul of a black cat possessing the body. Hippocrates stood there, didn't argue, just walked up, felt the child's forehead and said, "He's thirsty and sleep deprived. Let me boil some water and open the window." They prayed before every fever. They rubbed ashes on their feet to ease headaches. They glared at Hippocrates when he said, "Maybe your well water is poisoned by ironstone." He wasn't warmly welcomed, but that didn't matter, because he wasn't there to teach. He was there to learn how people endured illness, to learn how mothers wrapped leaves to their children's chests when they had fevers, to learn how old men recited illness like poems. And he wrote it down. Every night under the dim oil lamp, he spread out his old scroll, dipped the pen into dry ink, and recorded each cough, each chill, each time someone vomited blood. No one read, no one praised, but he wrote as if each stroke of the pen preserved their breath. It wasn't just documentation, it was remembrance. And from those lines later emerged the Corpus Hippocraticum, the foundation of Western medicine. From Thessaly, he went to Thrace, then to Athens, where schools and theories packed the streets like market stalls. There he was once invited to a lecture hall, but declined, because he knew the patient wasn't in the book, but in the leaf-roofed house at the end of the street. He once sat 2 nights with Democritus, the philosopher who believed the world was made of invisible particles. They didn't argue, just switched seats to listen to each other. And Hippocrates left Athens with a strange thought. Sometimes the illness lies deep within the soul, not the stomach or liver. But Hippocrates still travelled alone, carrying his only map. Symptoms, causes, food, climate, sleep. Every city, every land was a living experiment. He didn't preach, didn't rally, just observed, asked, listened and wrote. One day in Delphi, a man sobbed and called him a blasphemer. In front of the entire village and temple priests preparing for a smoke ritual. He was invited there as a blessing from Apollo, but refused to burn incense, refused anointing oil, refused anything but a clean towel and a jar of fresh water. An old lady screamed, "If there's no offering, how can there be healing?" Hippocrates simply bowed and softly said, because he refused to sacrifice a goat before treating a patient, he simply said, "I won't kill a goat to save a human, I'll keep them both alive." Hippocrates wasn't a heroic figure, just a young man traveling across the Greek world, listening to others' pain as if it were music to be transcribed. When he returned to Kos a few years later, he didn't bring treasure, but a habit that became a belief. Medicine is not the art of healing. It is the art of understanding the one who is ill. And so, when Hippocrates returned to his little island, he was no longer the boy sitting on the porch, but a man who carried within him a map of the world, drawn with coughs, fevers, and the silence between two breaths. Section 4. Revolutionary thinking. When someone dared to say, "The gods don't cure colds," you don't remember exactly when you started thinking differently. You just know it didn't come from some glorious moment, but from hundreds of nights sitting beside the dying and seeing no gods appear. From Kos to Athens, from Thrace to Lesbos, you had seen enough. A child shivering from being locked in a cave to expel demons. A mother forced to eat dry grass to cleanse the womb. An old man with malaria hung upside down before the altar of Hermes. All of that was called medicine. But you called it legalized neglect disguised as belief. And you started writing, not just illnesses, but rules. You once wrote an entire little book just to reject one single thing, that epilepsy was divine. While the people called it Apollo's rage, you called it a disorder of the brain, an organ long forgotten. You wrote, "I do not believe that the gods strike down children without reason." Many threw your books to the ground, but you kept writing. Rules about seasons, climate, food habits, breathing. No one asked you to do it. No one read it but you. But you kept writing, as if it were the rope pulling you out of the fog where people believed all pain was here as punishment. You started teaching, not to prove you were smart, but because you believed medical knowledge should never be a secret. A student once asked you, "Aren't you afraid others will copy all your secrets?" You just smiled and shook your head. Disease does not wait for one man. If I die and the knowledge lives on, that is true healing. Not in the town square, but in quiet places. A bathhouse courtyard, a forgotten market corner, a long hallway in an abandoned temple. You told your students, disease does not come from the gods. It comes from imbalance. The body is a current, and medicine is the art of restoring its flow. Some listened and stayed silent. One time during a lesson at a public bathhouse, an old man in priest robes walked in. He pointed at you and yelled, "Blasphemer, one who spits on the face of Asclepius." The air froze. Some students stepped back. A child sobbed behind a wall. You didn't answer. You just stepped forward, knelt beside the convulsing patient on the ground, and began prescribing cool water, wrapping towels, massaging the stomach. No holy fire, no miracle, only life and hands. Some walked away. A student named Andron, who had listened to you for 3 summers. Andron stood up in the middle of class and threw his notebook to the floor. "You forget that we are children of the gods," he said, his eyes full of disappointment. You didn't respond, didn't hold him back, didn't explain, because you knew not everyone is ready to leave the shade of gods and step into the blinding sun of reason. And a few, very few, stayed. They were the first ones you called students. They didn't wear robes, didn't speak ancient Greek, but they could listen to breathing and weren't afraid to wipe blood from a deep wound. You taught them the first lesson. Don't treat the illness until you understand the person, because you had met people who survived fever but slowly died from loneliness, and others who didn't survive a cough just because they feared judgment. They asked you, "So what do you believe in then?" You didn't answer right away. You looked out to the sea, the one that once took you from Kos and now connected you to questions bigger than yourself. At last, you only said, "I believe the human body doesn't lie, as long as we know how to listen to it." And so you wrote a declaration, short few words, but unlike anything ever seen in Greek history. "I will not poison anyone even if they beg me. I will not perform abortions. I will not exploit the patient's body. I will keep secret all things heard in the examination room." This text would later be known as the Hippocratic Oath. That day, you didn't write alone. You invited the few students who stayed and stood together in a circle in the courtyard of an old temple. No incense, just the afternoon sun and the rustling of leaves. You read each line, and they repeated it slowly in their own voices. "I will not poison anyone even if they beg me." No one dared to breathe loudly. It wasn't an oath to the gods, but to their own conscience. You didn't think it would spread, but your students and their students carried it throughout the Greek world, then Rome, then all of Europe later, and over 2,000 years later people still read that oath before placing their hands on the scalpel. But back then, you were just someone writing on a wax tablet in the summer heat, sitting in a low-ceilinged room surrounded by the smell of herb sweat and dry ink. There was no glory. Only one thing was clear. If I no longer believe in the gods, then at least I will believe in the patient. Section 5, the sacred oath, when you don't bow to the gods, but bow to the one in pain. You didn't mean for it to become a ritual. It's just that the nights of healing had grown too silent, too heavy. No more students asking questions. No more wooden shoes running down the hall. Only the sound of broken breathing and the smell of burnt flesh from necrosis. And one day, you told your students, "We need to rewrite the boundary between healing and violation." The oath wasn't written to impress. It was written in Doric Greek trembling handwriting on a wax tablet. Later, someone took it to Alexandria to be copied. Then it spread to Pergamon, then Rome. And so, the oath you wrote under the oil lamp became the foundation for the medical ethics of the Roman world, to stop yourself from sliding between power and fear. Because you knew one thing clearly: healing is power, and power needs a guard. That night your students gathered. The oldest brought an oil lamp. The youngest carried a carved wooden plaque with uneven lines. You told them to stand in a circle in the courtyard of an abandoned temple. a place that once offered goat blood to Apollo. No gods, no name of Asclepius, no snakes curling around staffs, no priest to witness. Because you believed, medicine didn't need miracles, only promises kept, only words and lowered eyes. I will not poison anyone, even if they ask me. I will not perform abortions, even if society says it's right. I will not violate a patient's body, even if they cannot resist. I will keep secret, all things heard behind the curtain. And after each line, the students repeated together, slowly trembling, as if they were carving each word into their bones. No one clapped. No one cried, but you knew. For the first time they understood. Being a physician was not a gift of grace. It was accepting the duty to guard suffering, in silence. The next morning, the oath was posted on the clinic door. No one required it. No law demanded it. Some physicians in Athens claimed you were being pretentious. Someone wrote a satire. He who won't perform abortions has no patience. But you didn't respond, because oaths don't need debate. They need keeping, like holding a flame in a strong night wind. Just that. From that day on, everyone who walked through the door knew they were entering a place where the physician had placed their left hand over their heart and their right hand on a promise. And strangely, after that night, the sound of wooden shoes returned. A child knocked on the door, asking to learn. One of them was Polybus, who would not only inherit your clinic, but carry the oath across Greece, from Rhodes to Macedonia. When people asked, "Who taught you those words?" he simply replied, "Someone who believed healing means keeping promises, not keeping power." The woman holding her belly asked for examination. The soldier missing an arm sat silently waiting. No one mentioned that night. But centuries later, in Alexandria, Pergamon, then Rome, medical students would still be asked to recite that oath. Some forgot, some repeated it wrong, but wherever the oath lived, you still remained, not needed, because it had soaked into the smell of medicine, into the look shared between healer and the one being healed, where you were no longer just Hippocrates of Kos, but the first who believed medicine could have a soul. Section 6. Final Life and Legacy. When the teacher is no longer there, but lives on in every healing hand, you aged, slowly without tragedy. There was no final surgery, no farewell lecture. Just that morning, you didn't come out of your room like usual. The wind blew through the olive trees, and the smell of damp earth after the night rain slipped into a room whose walls bore stains of dried blood. A later student, Serenus, wrote, "We don't know the year he died, but we know that after him no one dared to treat the sick without considering right and wrong. You didn't leave behind many things: a dull scalpel, a singed cloak sleeve from falling into a lamp, an old wooden chest. Inside were wax papers, drawings of intestines and knee joints, and the last line written in your left hand shakier than usual. If there is someone next, teach them this: listening to a patient's heart matters more than reading any book." There was no grand funeral, no monument, just a few students placing a small stone tablet under the fig tree where you once gave lectures about the liver and bile. No portrait on the tablet, only one line: "He did not heal all but taught us never to stop trying." Later, many doctors from Cnidus continued to oppose your methods. They believed illness came from the gods not the humours, but wherever someone recovered from warm compresses instead of prayer, you had won. A few years later, the name Hippocrates began to appear in medical records in Alexandria. No one knows who wrote it first. Maybe Polybus. Maybe someone who never met you but found in your oath a reason not to quit. On the night their patient died in their arms. Galen, the great Roman physician, once wrote, "Every time I dissect a body, I hear Hippocrates whisper." Maybe it was metaphor, maybe it was real, but it was enough to let you live a few more centuries. And then, through the ages, you slowly became a symbol, a rough stone statue in front of the medical school gate in Byzantium, a short chapter in a Latin translation, a name printed on the oath thousands of students recite, sometimes without fully understanding but still repeating. Even today at Harvard or Yale, medical students still bow their heads and read an oath. Maybe it's not word for word what you wrote, but it's enough to remind, medicine didn't begin with pills, it began with responsibility. But there are still places where you live, in the eyes of a nurse bending down to wipe the forehead of the dying without turning away, in a student writing prescriptions who gently asks the patient, "Did you eat anything today?" In a knock on the door at midnight, "Sorry, someone has a high fever. Is anyone on duty?" On the island of Kos, there's a tree people call the Tree of Hippocrates. No one's sure you ever stood beneath it, but whenever someone touches the old bark, the guide whispers, "He once taught under this shade," and so you live again, in the memory of someone who never met you. You don't need them to remember your name. You only hope, if someone somewhere far away on a very quiet night still whispers softly in their heart, "We are the keepers of the fire. We must not let it go out." Then that is enough.